For the first time in its 120-year history, the motor company is opening its car vault.
They broke open the doors to a legend's lair, and what they found inside left even seasoned collectors speechless. Hidden away from the world, Enzo Ferrari's personal garage wasn't just a storage room. It was a time capsule of secrets, prototypes, and machines no one ever knew existed.
Take apart and rebuild on top. It was fascinating, and everybody on board was so excited about that moment.
Why would the godfather of speed keep these locked away from the rest of the world? One thing's certain, this wasn't meant to be seen.
And have those wonderful organic shapes, and they just look sporty, and they feel sporty, and most of them sound sporty, and they're a lot of fun to drive.
Join us as we uncover what Enzo Ferrari took to the grave. Sliding doors at Modena. The old wooden door creaked open. Sunlight landed quietly on the metal curves of a green two-door coupe. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then whispers began to echo off the concrete walls. The car in front of them wasn't just any Ferrari. It was Enzo Ferrari's personal 400 Super America. Not many people had seen it. Fewer still had stood this close. The paint, called Verde Dora, still shimmered softly, as if it had held on to the sun from 1,000 drives through the countryside. The seats, covered in striped corduroy, looked like they remembered stories, quiet ones, of morning drives across the hills of Emilia-Romagna, far from racetracks and reporters. But it was the car next to it that caused the real confusion. A plain grey Peugeot 404, nothing special at first glance, just a simple sedan, fitted with fog lights from a Lancia and a wooden steering wheel. Most people would have walked past it, but not Enzo. This was the car he actually used most. Some say he drove it to avoid being recognized, but the truth, he just liked it. It was soft on the bumpy Italian roads, and it never broke down. More than anything, he enjoyed the quiet. He could drive into the factory without anyone noticing. No cheers, no cameras, no red carpets. That was his way. Let the brand shine. Not the man. But this garage wasn't just a hiding place for old cars. On the shelves, stacks of dusty binders held lap times from Fiorano, the private track he built beside his house after officials told him to stop testing at Modena. In one corner, under a dirty cloth, a worn leather briefcase lay half open. Inside, sketches of cars that never saw the light of day, half dreams on folded paper. Even the smell told its own story. Gasoline, old documents, and the dry scent of Modena soil still clinging to the tires. When the door finally slid shut again, the people inside knew they hadn't just found a garage. They'd stepped into a part of Enzo Ferrari's mind that he rarely let the world see. A place where he didn't care about showing off. A place where only one thing mattered, what worked. And the story of that green Super America, that one had roots in a twist no one saw coming. It started decades earlier with a single phone call from someone who wanted more than just a fast car. Peugeot over prancing horses. Late 1950s, Modena, Italy. In those days, Ferraris were the cars of choice for royalty and rock stars. But strangely enough, the man who made those legendary cars often arrived at his own factory driving something far simpler, a tiny Fiat.
Of course, for his own personal use, Mr. Ferrari drives something a bit more practical. He drives a Fiat.
Journalists who waited outside the gates would spot Enzo Ferrari casually rolling up next to them in traffic, barely recognizable behind the wheel of these modest little vehicles. He'd tried driving his own creations, like the stunning 330 GT 2+2, but the engine noise was too much for everyday errands. And as the years passed, an aching knee made navigating stop-and-go city traffic painful. Just when the discomfort became unbearable, a friend from a Peugeot dealership in Modena offered him something different. A plain-looking Peugeot 404 sedan fitted with soft beige leather seats. It wasn't a glamorous choice, but it moved gracefully over rough roads and started reliably every cold morning. It was exactly what Enzo needed. His engineers thought he'd gone crazy. How could the founder of the world's most admired sports car brand prefer a simple French family sedan? But Enzo only smiled. For him, comfort and reliability weren't luxuries, they were necessities that helped him think clearly. To their amazement, he ordered another Peugeot, this time a 504 sedan, and later a discreetly stylish 504 coupe. Ferrari's racing drivers still remember jumping into these unlikely cars for rides to the Monza track when the fancy factory limousines were busy. They even joked about the French taxi, laughing that it was probably the only car Enzo drove without yelling at the gearbox. The media never caught on, except once. A small Italian magazine tried to stir controversy, labeling Enzo's choice a scandal. Instead of responding publicly, Enzo simply clipped the article, scrawled "Non capiscono nulla," "they understand nothing," across the headline, and quietly tucked it into his desk drawer. He never spoke of it again. Yet hidden beneath this unusual preference was a bigger dream, a car that blended comfort and racing power into one elegant machine. Parked next to his Peugeot was the magnificent Ferrari 400 Super America, an ambitious luxury coupe he'd envisioned for exactly that purpose. Enzo wanted a car capable of gliding effortlessly across Italy, with enough power to impress even his toughest critics, yet quiet enough for whispered conversations inside the cabin. Essentially, he aimed for the perfect middle ground, the smooth ride of a Peugeot combined with the thrilling power of a Ferrari. But to achieve this balance, he needed a completely new engine. Enzo called upon Gioacchino Colombo, the engineer behind Ferrari's earliest racing victories. Colombo promised something remarkable: a 4-liter V12 engine, smooth and quiet at low speeds, yet powerful enough to roar when pushed. After hearing Colombo's proposal, Enzo offered no grand speeches. He simply nodded and uttered a single word: "Costruiscilo, build it." That one quiet word set everything in motion. Secret test cars began appearing late at night around Modena's quiet roads. Locals slept soundly, unaware that Enzo himself was behind the wheel of these disguised prototypes, carefully testing how smoothly they navigated the cobbled streets. He knew that if he could capture that perfect ride, a Ferrari as comfortable as his trusted Peugeot, he'd finally have a car truly worthy of sharing his garage. The vision was clear. Now it was time to see if the metal and leather could deliver on his dream. Birth of a flagship. The crowds had seen it all: massive American coupes covered in chrome, engines loud enough to rattle teeth. But when the Ferrari 400 Super America debuted in Turin in 1960, everything changed. It didn't shout. It whispered. Low-slung, graceful, and impossibly sleek, it sat waist-high with a roofline that swept back like a single brushstroke. People stopped in their tracks. For once, the noise wasn't coming from the car. It was from the stunned silence around it. Beneath the long hood purred a brand-new V12 engine, developed by the same man who had helped Ferrari win its first races, Gioacchino Colombo. It was strong, yes, 340 horsepower on paper, more than many race cars of the time, but the surprise came when it settled into a calm, silky idle. It wasn't just fast, it was civilized. Enzo had been clear from the start. The car had to be as comfortable as it was capable. He demanded a 4-speed gearbox with an electronic overdrive for the top gear. He explained almost casually that he liked cruising at 140 kilometers per hour while the engine barely ticked above 3,000 RPM. It saved fuel, saved the ears, and most of all, preserved the dignity of the drive. Reporters didn't believe it until he took them for a ride. They stepped out speechless, realizing the numbers on paper didn't come close to the feeling in the passenger seat. This wasn't a car you picked up from any showroom. Only a handful of dealers were even allowed to offer it. Each order came with a list of options longer than a restaurant menu. Covered or exposed headlights, leather or corduroy seats, fitted luggage to match the interior. Even the license plates were special. Each one bore the letters SA for Super America. Not just a name, but Ferrari's own quiet signal that this was something above the rest. Pininfarina sharpened the car's shape further, crafting what came to be known as the Coupe Aerodinamico. The roof melted into the rear deck without a single hard edge. The grille was clean and rectangular, understated, almost conservative. But that was exactly the point. In Enzo's eyes, the most powerful things didn't need to scream. They needed to carry weight without effort. His own car was painted Verde Dora, a subtle green that turned golden in the Modena sunset. It wasn't loud, but it turned heads all the same. People who saw it didn't say, "What is that?" They said, "Who drives that?" Only around 50 cars were built in total. Not because demand was low, but because Enzo wanted it that way. This car wasn't about numbers. It was about making a statement. This is what happens when Ferrari builds without compromise. The mechanics called it La Presidenziale. Not as a joke, but out of respect. When one came in for service, everything else stopped. These weren't cars you repaired. These were machines you prepared. Paint was polished until it looked like still water. Even the smallest parts were hand-finished, shaped to fit perfectly, not just functionally. And yet, inside Enzo's own garage, the 400 Super America sat quietly next to a Peugeot 404, a car so ordinary that it cost less than a single set of the Ferrari's wheels. New visitors couldn't make sense of it until they understood what each car meant. The Peugeot was for the traffic, the chaos, the everyday. The Super America? That was for nights, when Enzo left the factory after dark, craving solitude, aiming the long hood down empty roads toward Bologna. No traffic, no conversation. Just the hum of the engine and the fog drifting low across the Po Valley. In the end, the 400 Super America wasn't built to dazzle the press. It was built to satisfy one man's personal idea of perfection: quiet speed, controlled power, confidence without show. But just as the car was finding its rhythm in Ferrari's story, something odd happened. It was given not one identity, but two. A quiet sleight of hand that left historians confused for decades. Two numbers, one car. Early in 1961, when chassis 3097 SA rolled out of Pininfarina's workshop, nobody could guess the twists awaiting it, not even Enzo Ferrari himself. For almost 2 years, this elegant green Ferrari secretly roamed the back roads around Modena and the fresh asphalt of Ferrari's new Fiorano test track. It remained hidden from curious eyes, testing comfort and reliability, clocking kilometers no one else would know about. Then, just before Christmas of 1962, something unusual happened. Mechanics lifted the car onto the workshop hoist and received strange instructions from above. Change its identity. A few taps of a metal punch later, chassis 3097 SA suddenly became 4031 SA. But if you looked closely enough, at just the right angle, the ghost of its original numbers could still be seen beneath the new stamp, like faint memories stubbornly refusing to fade away. But why would Ferrari do something like that? The explanation is a blend of practical secrecy and factory habits. Test cars often received new numbers before delivery, erasing their experimental past. There was also the strange logic of Ferrari's numbering system. Enzo wanted the original number, 3097 SA, free for another project, one that ultimately never happened. This simple shuffle created a rarity, a Ferrari with two overlapping identities etched into its metal. Yet the mystery didn't stop there. Under its elegant hood sat an engine with a past of its own. The powerful V12, numbered 1287A, had once belonged to an endurance-testing 250 GTE prototype, one that met its fate in a crash. The engine survived intact, having proved its strength over thousands of test kilometers. Transplanting it into the Super America meant giving new life to a proven champion. This combination, an endurance-tested heart, wrapped in Pininfarina's sleekest creation, made this Ferrari completely unique, even among limited editions. Every corner of the car hinted at secret experiments. Its suspension components bore no manufacturer's markings, hinting they came straight from the factory's development workshops. At the rear, engineers quietly fitted a special adjustable linkage, one never replicated in any other Super America. Even the steering box was unusual, stamped with a date years after the original chassis had been built, suggesting Enzo had continued tweaking his creation long after it left the drawing board. For Ferrari historians, this car became a rolling diary, proof that Enzo's designs were never truly complete, only paused. And for Enzo himself, it was more than a luxury toy. It was his private test lab, quietly refining ideas that might someday find their way into future Ferraris. The car's interior told its own story of experimentation. The seats combined black leather cushions with corduroy-lined backs, a secret blend never officially listed in Ferrari's catalogue. This identity switch also helped the car stay hidden from collectors who meticulously tracked chassis numbers at auctions. For decades, it moved quietly through the shadows, from Enzo's hands to a Milanese dealer, eventually reaching Philadelphia collector Sidney Markowitz. Only in 2001, on a sunny auction stage at Pebble Beach, did experts finally piece together its double identity, sparking debates among Ferrari fans worldwide. But back in Modena, during those quiet evenings of the early 60s, none of this mattered to Enzo. He only cared about the comfort it brought to his sore knee and the instant response of the smooth V12. To him, chassis numbers and factory records were meaningless details. What truly counted was the freedom the car gave him, the ability to slip away at night along empty country roads, the sound of 12 cylinders slicing gently through the silence. Chassis numbers don't create legends. Legends live beneath polished aluminium hoods, in engines that defy logic, roar with purpose, and should perhaps never have existed in the first place. V12 Heartbeat. Gioacchino Colombo's Type 163 engine wasn't just another piece of machinery, it was the quiet soul at the heart of a legend. Think back to 1960. Most sports cars needed to shout for attention, but this V12 just whispered, then roared when it had to. Sure, the numbers on paper were impressive, a touch under 4 liters, 8.8 to 1 compression, 340 horses ready to bolt, and a top speed that made jaws drop. But numbers never told the whole story. Not in this car. What set this engine apart was its elegance. It didn't shake or snarl, it sang. 3 Weber carburetors fed the cylinders, at first with a gentle hiss that slowly turned into a deep, rolling soundtrack as the revs climbed. It was the kind of noise that made your hair stand up, but never made you flinch. Colombo kept things simple. Single cams for each bank, 2 coils for peace of mind. So even if one spark plug failed, the engine kept going. Enzo Ferrari himself demanded reliability after watching too many drivers limp home on battered cars. Even the oil stayed cool, thanks to a smart little trick borrowed from endurance racers. Beneath the engine, the story continued. The frame crisscrossed like a ladder, strong but light. The front end used independent wishbones, so the car could dart through corners, while the back stuck to a more traditional live axle, predictable and sturdy, just as Colombo liked it. And when it came time to stop, the disc brakes were modern, sharp, and a little bit defiant, standing up to the kind of punishing speeds that old drum brakes simply couldn't handle. But all these parts, all these choices, would be nothing without the human moments that brought them to life. Former Ferrari engineer Mauro Forghieri remembered one shakedown ride with Enzo himself, the sun barely up, the countryside still asleep. Enzo gripped the long gear lever, slipped the car into second, and eased away as if the engine were made of silk. No shudder, no protest, just a smooth, steady surge. When the road opened up, Enzo pressed the throttle, and the V12 responded. The sound deepened, the world outside blurred, and before Forghieri realized it, the speedometer swept past 200. There was power, but not violence. Just pure, effortless strength. That smoothness set the 400 Super America apart from any other Ferrari. For the first time, you could talk at speed, share a laugh, and hear the world outside without shouting. Enzo would often leave the side windows slightly open, listening for the echo of another Ferrari being put through its paces in the distance. He believed in power that didn't wear you down, a car that could thrill but also carry you home in comfort. Decades later, that same V12 would show its staying power. Even after years of rallies and cross-country adventures, the engine barely showed its age. When collectors at the Revs Institute finally took the car in, they swapped the old Pirelli tires for new ones, but kept the originals sealed up just to hold on to a little piece of Modena. To this day, that engine comes to life with a twist of the key, and every visitor stops and stares. But Enzo Ferrari always knew an engine is only as good as the road it drives on. And if the perfect road didn't exist, Enzo would build it himself, right outside his own front door. From garage to track. When Modena's local officials clamped down on noise at the old racetrack, Enzo Ferrari refused to let anyone silence his vision. If the world wouldn't give him the perfect place to test his cars, he'd create one from scratch. He picked a patch of quiet farmland, just steps from his own home. By April 1972, the Fiorano circuit was alive, just under 3 kilometers long, yet filled with tight turns borrowed from racing's greatest circuits. It was more than a place to chase speed. It was a living laboratory where every part of a car could be pushed to its edge. But Fiorano was more than asphalt and corners. For Enzo, it became a second living room. From his upstairs office, he could glance out the window and watch the latest Ferrari prototypes storm by, the sound carrying straight through his walls. On quiet days, he'd walk down to his garage, start the 400 Super America, and drive across a narrow bridge straight onto his personal playground. Enzo, sometimes in pajamas and a heavy coat, asking for his Super America late at night, clearing his mind by racing 10 laps under the stars. The track had its own cast of characters. Factory engineers shuttled to and from Fiorano in simple Peugeot sedans, their trunks packed with spare parts and tools, while the Super America prowled the circuit like a prowling cat. The sight of a muscular V12 sharing tarmac with a humble French sedan summed up everything about Ferrari, one eye on perfection, the other on practicality. Fiorano was a place to experiment. Enzo never stopped searching for ways to make fast cars more comfortable. His team softened springs, swapped shock absorbers, and tried out new tires, always searching for that perfect mix of speed and comfort. Sometimes those little tweaks found their way into Ferraris you'd see on city streets, their roots tracing back to laps at Fiorano. There was also another side to the track. On quiet afternoons, Enzo would invite special guests for private rides, letting them feel the Super America's unique charm from the passenger seat. He cared less about lap times and more about how smoothly the car glided through a corner. Enzo would greet his guests at the last turn, cane in hand, always asking what they thought of the ride, not the speed. For him, comfort was just as important as horsepower. After Enzo's passing in 1988, Fiorano lived on as a test bed for the next generation, while the 400 Super America grew from prototype to rolling legend. Even in classic rallies, the old V12 still felt most alive, around 180 kilometers per hour, where the noise faded. The engine settled into a steady hum, and every mile felt like a private celebration of everything Enzo loved. But myths have a way of growing in Modena's shadows. Fans whispered that Enzo drove only Ferraris, filled his garage with nothing but race cars, and cared little for comfort. The real story, hidden behind a simple garage door, told a very different tale. Walk through a classic car